Chapter 1: The Philippines in the 19th Century. Audio recorded by Mr. Vidal. Chapter 1: The Philippines in the 19th Century. Bago ko simula ng pagbabasa, medyo baka mabulol-bulol ako ha, ganun talaga, tao lang. And this is a recorded version ng ating pong book. So bear with me. Okay, let's start the discussion. The 19th century was a dynamic and creative age, especially in Europe and the United States. During this period, such concepts as industrialism, democracy, and nationalism triggered revolutionary changes in science, technology, economics, and politics. These changes enabled man to achieve the heights of prosperity and dignity. Although 19th century Philippines was largely medieval, signs of progress or change were noted in certain sectors. Its social and economic structure was based on the old feudalistic patterns of abuse and exploitation of the Indios. Racial discriminatory practices were oppressive. Intellectual decadence prevailed, and government processes did not respect the needs of the people. See? Social structure. Ganon. Philippine society was predominantly feudalistic, the result of the Spanish landholding system imposed upon the country with the arrival of the conquistadors. An elite class exploited the masses, fostered by the master slave relationship between the Spaniards and the Filipinos. The Spaniards exacted all forms of taxes and tributes and drafted the natives for manual labor. Consequently, the poor became poorer and the rich richer. The pyramidal structure of the 19th century Philippine society favored the Spaniards. Its apex was occupied by the Spanish officials, the peninsulares, and the friars. Its base by the Filipino majority, the Indios, and its middle area by a small middle class which consisted of favored natives, mestizos, and creoles. Racial discrimination was prevalent as the Spanish born peninsulares were given the highest offices and positions in the society, while the Creoles, the Philippine born Spaniards, the half breed or mestizos, enjoyed second priority, and the natives or Indios were looked down upon. Nagkamali pa. Political system. Spain governed the Philippines through the Ministro de Ultramar, or the Ministry of the Colonies, established in Madrid in 1863. This body helped the Spanish monarchs manage the affairs of the colonies and govern the Philippines through a centralized machinery, exercising executive, legislative, judicial, and religious powers. The Governor General, or Gobernador General, appointed by the Spanish monarch headed by the central administration in Manila. He was the king's representative in all state and religious matters, and as such, he exercised extensive powers. He issued executive orders and proclamations and had supervision and disciplinary powers over all government officials. He was commander in chief of the armed forces of the Philippines. He had supreme authority in financial matters until 1784. The Governor General was theoretically responsible for all government and religious activities during his term, including petty official negligence and faulty administration of justice. Next to the central government in the hierarchical structure were the provincial governments or alcaldías led by alcaldes, mayors, civil governors, and the city governments called cabildo or ayuntamiento, administered by two alcaldes and ordinario, mayor and vice mayor. The gobernadorcillo, fondly called captain by his constituents, was the chief executive and chief judge of a town. He was elected at the beginning of every year by a board composed of members of the town principalia, a body of citizens of high standing usually made up of the incumbent or ex-cabeza de barangay. The smallest unit of government was the barangay or barrio. Each barangay was controlled by a cabeza de barangay, whose main responsibility was to maintain peace and order to collect tributes and taxes in his barrio. The Guardia Civil and quadrilleros performed police duties and helped maintain peace and order. The alferez, second lieutenant, usually a Spaniard, headed the corps of Guardia Civil in each town. Now let's talk about the educational system. For almost 300 years since the Spaniards established the first, nabubulol ako. Ulitin ko. Educational system. For almost 300 years since the Spaniards established the first settlement in the Philippines, there was no systematic government supervision of schools. The schools were free to administer their own curricula and prescribe the qualifications of their teachers. The most serious criticisms against the system were the overemphasis on religious matters, the obsolete teaching methods, the limited curriculum, the very poor classroom facilities, and the absence of teaching materials such as books in the elementary and high school levels. Primary education was neglected. The absence of academic freedom, the prejudice against Filipinos in the schools of higher learning, and the prior's control over the system were also reported. The friars occupied a dominant position in the Philippine educational system, for religion was the main subject in the schools. Fear of God was emphasized, and obedience to the friars was instilled in the minds of the people. They were constantly reminded that they had inferior intelligence and that they were fit only for manual labor. These practices resulted in a lack of personal confidence and a development of inferiority complex. The absence of academic freedom in Spain's educational system was extended to the schools that the Spaniards established in the Philippines. Learning in every level was largely by rote. Students memorized and repeated the contents of books which they did not understand. At the end of the Spanish period, the College of San Juan de Letran was the only official secondary school in the Philippines, although secondary education was also offered at the Ateneo de Manila. 7 provinces had private colleges and Latin schools for general studies, and secondary education for girls was furnished by 5 colleges in Manila: Santa Isabel, La Concordia, Santa Rosa, Looban, and Santa Catalina. Nagkamali pa ako dun. Up to the end of the Spanish regime, the University of Santo Tomas was the only institution of university level in Manila, initially established solely for Spaniards and mestizos. It opened its doors to Filipino students decades before the end of Spanish rule. The Educational Decree of 1863 marked a milestone in the history of the education in the Philippines. Under Spain, for the first time, provisions were made for the establishment of teacher training schools and for government supervision of the public school system. Thank you.